we have always getting better response from customers. Lot of footfall. From year 2015, we are participating in ProPak Asia Thailand. And this year also, due to COVID, there are lesser movement, but the key customer, who are our customer, and more people who are interested in our product are visiting frequently.
At first, Liquid Box planned to be in ProPak exhibition and have a booth, actual booth there anyway, because we know that people around the world will come to ProPak especially for the packaging business. However, the COVID situation did not support us that much to be physically being there to meet our potential client and also our partners. So ProPak has offered us the hybrid exhibition, which actually answering what we are looking for, because we still want to meet our potential clients and also our partner, but without physically being there. So that's why, with no hesitation, we actually participate in hybrid exhibition.
Hello, สวัสดีค่ะ Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rose Chitanuwat. I am your session opening for today. We have the good moderator together with me today. First of all, before going to the session of the WPO meeting, the experts recycling in packaging, I would like to introduce a bit here. You may be in the platform propakasia.com/ve, our virtual exhibition, which is providing you the access to your suppliers and also to the webinar, which is providing the knowledge and up-to-date market trends in this platform. Altogether, I would like to tell you that you can come back and watch it in the rerun version in this platform till 23rd, and then we are going to have the new version of virtual event platform, which is called ProPak Connect on 23rd of June. So today, together with me, we have a group of the experienced expert in the packaging sector with me for the WPO meeting, the experts, but really the experts here. This webinar would not be able to organize without the support of World Packaging Organization, Amcor, Flexible, Label Makers Group. So today I would like to start the session by introducing our moderator, Professor Pierre Pienaar. He is the president of World Packaging Organization. And then I pass this to Dr. Pierre. He will introduce you to all the speakers. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rose, for that introduction. And it is so good to be back again. We were all together last week on sustainability, and tonight, today, this morning, we will be covering and looking into recycling. We have an excellent lineup today of experts, and I'll be introducing them to you in a moment. But I want to share with you the fact that these three gentlemen make up 100 years of experience. So to all those viewers and listeners across the world, now is your chance to ask anything you want to when it comes to recycling. And I'm sure if they don't know, they'll find out and make sure that they'll come back to you with an answer. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our first expert to you, and that is Graham. And Graham Lang has 40 years of product development experience across many facets of packaging and across the packaging industry at large. His focus has been on adhesive and ink formulation, fiber packaging design, paper and plastics recycling, foam manufacture, and label materials design. He was instrumental in establishing the pressure-sensitive label materials division for his company, and that was way back in the early 1990s at Label Makers. In his past 20 years, he's really focused on sustainability and looking at new product design with that in mind, and he works very closely with a number of universities and other industry partners and major recycling houses across Southeast Asia. And his focus has always been to improve recycling. So Graham, over to you. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you, Pierre, and welcome everybody. Thank you for the kind introduction. I've done more than my fair share contributing to the 100 years, I suppose. But to do a quick recap, I guess it's the best way of explaining my experience in this area. My experience, I guess, has built upon education in science, particularly chemistry. Working life began on a lab bench, making and formulating adhesives for a small family-run business in Melbourne. That followed several years with a large fibre packaging and fibre recycling organisation. And there my role was pretty much to develop the inks that held that packaging together, develop protective coatings, and protective and preserving coatings. And I guess it was there that I had the first exposure to the sort of problems, the things that I was employed to make, the adhesives and inks and coatings, what have you, were having on the recycling and recovery of the fibre that they were attached to. As Pierre mentioned, I then followed with a role at a global pressure-sensitive label production company, combining, I guess, the knowledge I'd gained with paper and adhesives and coatings to develop new pressure-sensitive structures. And I guess one of those that was in the public domain was Australia's first pressure-sensitive label, pressure-sensitive stamp, postage stamp. And I mention that because it's a technique that we used there for removing the stamps from the envelope that we're still using today in the recycling process to separate labels from primary packaging. So as Pierre says, 30 years at label makers, the last 30 years, and much of that focus has been working with large global beverage and food companies that are operating in Australasia, breweries, dairies, CSD and water bottlers and food manufacturers. And I think the thing that, you know, in my time at label makers, the change that I've seen is if I look back 30 years, we had to be the most linear operation you could imagine. You know, we produced huge amounts of composite, difficult to recycle waste in our label production process. A third of what we supplied to the customer, the release liner, was consigned to a waste bin and landfill before the customer's product even left their premises. So we have spent a great deal of time and effort investigating means by which that spent release liner could be recovered. And look, today I'm pleased to say we've developed pathways for the recovery of both spent fibre release liner and spent polymer release liner. And so the thing, you know, without sort of taking too much time, the perspective that I've gained working with these large brand owners is very much one that requires cooperation. I mean, we just will not come up with functioning recycling systems unless we understand the recyclers' processes and unless we collaborate. And you know, from my perspective, you know, 40 plus years actually as a perhaps jaundiced cynical material scientist, it probably is the most kind of exciting and fulfilling time to be, you know, designing with that new imperative for recyclability. It's a golden time for somebody in my position, and like I say, it demands that we collaborate up and down the supply chain. It's the recyclers, it's the brand owners, it's the raw material manufacturers, it's the converters. And without that cooperation, we're just not going to optimize the recovery of the packaging.
Thank you very much, Graham, and that certainly gives a very good insight into your knowledge. And I encourage all the listeners and the viewers to don't hesitate to put in any questions you want to. Now's your chance. Just drop them in the Q&A and I'll pick them up there. So the next expert I'd like to introduce is Henki Wabawa. Henki is certainly a leading packaging consultant in Indonesia and across Southeast Asia. He's also the executive director for the Indonesian Packaging Federation based out of Jakarta. Henki has more than 30 years experience in the packaging space, looking at business development and research across many different manufacturing industries. But he certainly continues to engage actively with government, academia, and the industry. He's an electrical engineer by profession, and he is also vice president of the World Packaging Organization, responsible for global education. Henki.
Thank you, Pierre. I think, I don't know, I cannot start my video. Oh, okay. Okay. So, back to my experience. I think I started in this business since 1984 in the packaging, and especially in the so-called flexible packaging, which is some people are saying it's multi-layers. So many layers of film and foils and so on. And this is the major packaging sector, especially in this country, in Indonesia, where I'm living now. Actually, the most challenging, actually, if we are talking about the recyclability, at present, I believe about almost 50% of the packaging, post-consumer packaging waste definitely is from multi-layers. So that's the most challenging, as I said. So, but in fact, I believe that they always have a solution. I believe that the packaging is still needed in Indonesia, for example. This is a big population and still a growing population, though at present during the pandemic is of course the some of the industry has slowed down, but fast-moving consumer good, food, for example, definitely we still need it. So that is especially now we are in the so-called social distance. So everything is should be packed. So even you move in your lifestyle in e-commerce, internet, online, and so on, but you still need more on the packaging. But what kind of packaging? That's why I said the most challenging in the packaging sector is the ability to design the packaging with the whole aspect that we have to put in the balance. First, to make it better in order to really give the functionality of the product that we have to pack. Definitely, like food, you need a barrier in order to have a shelf life and so on. And then you have to make it also the material safe for us. It's not giving effect to your healthiness. And then today is also that the packaging should be delivered faster. Yeah. So the urban lifestyle today, no time anymore so much in order to cook and everything. So even the packaging as well, you have to supply in a faster way, and then the packaging should be as well not giving economical impact. So then this should be cheap as possible, economically as possible. And last but not least, now become very much important is the sustainability. Sustainability is become so important, I believe, that that especially in this country, that the whole waste, they are talking a lot about waste of plastic. But in fact, if we see the end station of the whole waste, which is we call it always open dumping landfill. Here still the major is still using an open dumping landfill. 60% is organic waste. It's not the plastic. The plastic is only 40%. That is the whole challenge actually. What is wrong in this? It is the waste management actually. So that's why that is the whole effort that we try to work with the whole. We have to collaborate with whole stakeholders like the government, as mentioned before, for the regulation, the legislation, and then the whole brand owners who use the packaging, and then the retail business, and then the consumer itself. We have to educate how not to make it littering harm the environment. So that is the whole challenge that we have to make. First, of course, our responsibility as a packaging developer is how to redesign in order to make it the packaging recyclable. That is most important. That's what also we try to make a guideline for that in order to that everyone, especially in the converters and the brand owners as well, to understand what could be recyclable with the technology available now in this country. So the whole guideline should be a collaboration with that. And as mentioned, that we need definitely a lot of efforts in that, and it's still a good challenge. Still a good challenge for that. I think.
Thank you, Enki.
Thank you.
I appreciate that, and nice to hear all that background information around recycling. Well, it gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce our third expert, Richard Smith. Now, Richard is the Director of Sustainability at Amcor Flexibles in Asia Pacific. He's a chemical engineer by profession, and he has over 30 years experience, so hence where the 100 years comes from. But he focuses heavily on innovation, enabling consumers to become more circular through responsible packaging solutions. In 2013 already, Richard was made a Fellow of the Australian Institute of Packaging for his contribution to the development of innovative plastics in packaging. And more recently, as late as last year, he was appointed as a non-executive director of the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Pierre. Thank you for the lovely introduction, and hello to everyone that's joining us this afternoon. It's certainly my pleasure to be invited here by ProPak and the organisers with the World Packaging Organisation. Thanks very much. A little bit of background for me, just in terms of my background in recycling. I first really ventured into recycling back in 1990, and I was involved in with an organisation to help set up PET bottle recycling in Australia back in 1990. And it was a groundbreaking work where, in fact, world's first bottle got produced in Australia with post-consumer recycled materials back in 1992. And I did all the work relative to ensuring that we were able to get an FDA letter of non-objection for the materials and the bottle that got produced and eventually commercialised with some very large brand owners who I'm sure we all know. So that was very exciting for me and introduced me to a lot of elements around mechanical recycling. And in between time now and coming forward to more recent times, and working in flexible packaging, been very interested in mechanical recycling and the opportunities might exist for flexible packaging, but also being involved in studying what's happening in what people call advanced recycling and where that might be taking us to ensure that we can get circular outcomes for our flexible packaging, because as Hanky touched on, and right across Asia Pacific, which is the area across which I work, we see flexible packaging is certainly a very popular form of packaging that's used. Obviously, we're seeing it not being recycled to the extent it should be today, and of course that has consequences for our environment, with significantly large amounts of packaging plastics entering into the oceans and waterways, and we need to be able to resolve that. So very much focused on that space and have been working, as Pierre, you mentioned, with the Australian Packaging Covenant. I've been working on their technical advisory committee here in Australia, which is a team that helps to decide whether a package and a packaging format is actually recyclable or not, and therefore what sort of labelling can be applied underneath the Australian Packaging Covenant, and the Australasian Recycling logo that gets utilised here, which is an excellent way of actually putting a label onto packaging and informing consumers about how they can or cannot recycle a package. So it's certainly been very heavily involved in that, and working with a lot of organisations now in my role across Asia Pacific, talking to many organisations, whether they're government, non-government. We're involved with the Alliance to End Plastic Waste across, and I have a role in one of the thematic expert streams that's been run. So lots of different experiences trying to create the circularity of plastics and packaging, Pierre.
Thank you very much, Richard. And as you can all see for yourselves, we have a great team of a varied experience in recycling. Before I continue, if the other two gentlemen, Graham and Henke, could switch on your cameras and your microphones. Thank you very much. This is the part that I always enjoy, and this is what makes these expert panels alive. They've given you a good background. They've indicated where their expertise lies, and now we're going to embark on learning ourselves firsthand from them. And I want to kick off with Graham and by asking a question that I'm sure many of us want to know, and that is recycling truly beneficial for the environment?
I guess the answer to that, Pierre and everyone, is of course, yes. With dwindling resources against the background of increased population wanting, more and more, it's vital that we recycle so that we can, preserve and not deplete raw materials. I guess Richard, drew attention to the issue with oceans and contamination of plastics in our oceans and waterways, and that's an obvious consequence of not recycling, and an obvious negative impact on the environment. I guess we've all heard the idea that if we do continue in this linear economy way that we are, if we don't do anything, you know, by 2050 there'll be more plastic in the oceans than there will be fish. Look, one of the things I suppose that I think's in our midst a perfect exemplar of a product that is, you know, used, thousands of tons are used every day by almost everybody, and it's exactly the same material that our labels are printed on, that are attached to the bottles that we find in the ocean, and yet not 1 gram of it, not 1 micron finds its way into the oceans or into landfill. And the answer is money, our polymer currency. You know, it is a fantastic exemplar because printed right there on it is what value is involved in that product. And so, you know, I'm a great believer, I suppose, in the quantitative approach that's being taken. You know, we can, through measurement, through life cycle analysis, through carbon disclosures, really measure and know what impact, what options we might have, A versus B, which option has a, you know, potentially lower environmental impact. And just like we do with economic evaluations. And so we have the ability to assess and measure the impact that recycling has, and it's something we need to do. It's something we are doing, something we need to do.
Thank you for that. Which leads me to the next one, Henky. And when is flexible packaging considered recyclable?
Well, this is, as I said, this is both challenging. And at present, we are talking about so-called the monomaterial, so-called the polyolefin for the multi-layers. But then the question, how about the other functionality? We're talking about the barrier, for example. You know, in the flexible packaging, at the beginning, there are a lot using aluminum foil. We laminate with the whole structure of the polyester or BOPP or BOPE and so on. And but that is definitely is not recyclable, and that what we have to replace. And the whole development in a material today is much as possible. For example, that the material that is not let's say compatible in the mechanical recycling, like polyester together with the polyolefin, then we can replace the polyester and nylon with the BOPE, for example. This is by processing and so on. So the monomaterial is one of the consideration. The next is of course recycling of the so-called the barrier layer by coating, for example, which is the coating is also not will harm a lot in the processing of the recycling, for example. That is possible to make it upcycle. But at present, for example, like Indonesia, that we do have only mechanical recycling. Then it's the whole recycling content is also become so high, so that that's become a downcycling. For example, that you can make another product in that, but still a lot going into the incineration. That is unfortunately, and especially also still in the developed country like Europe and so on. But slowly they will shut down in order regarding the carbon footprint that's already mentioned by Graham before. So I think that is the future of the technology that we have to adopt.
Thank you. You know, Richard, in your intro, you sort of touched on it, and I want to ask you to revisit what are the two types of recycling? And can you give the viewers some sort of explanation of these two types of recycling, how it works and so on?
Okay, sure. Thanks, Pierre. So, as I said before, I started off in working on PET recycling, and that was really mechanical recycling. And maybe a simple description of that, it's very similar to, in fact, what happens when paper is recycled, glass is recycled. It's a mechanical breaking down, chipping, making into smaller flakes the plastic bottles that get collected in that case, the PET bottles. And they can go through various processes of being washed, air dried, and eventually collated into a group of flakes that may in fact even get put into a process where you pass the flakes over with a nitrogen gas at maybe relative high temperatures and extract out any contaminants that might have been in, and then eventually melt that material back into pellets. And those pellets are, in that case, PET pellets of food safe and can go back into bottles. And that's sort of mechanical recycling, can be done with many different materials. More recently, and my interest for flexible packaging has been around advanced recycling, and I'll explain a bit about that, but the main reason I've been interested in advanced recycling is that with flexible packaging, and because there's inks and because there's adhesives involved and actually many more materials, it's very challenging, in fact, through mechanical recycling to make food grade recyclate that's suitable to go back into food packaging. And that's where the interest in industry that we're seeing is really emerging now into advanced, or some people call it chemical recycling. And in terms of advanced recycling, there's probably four main areas of focus of development and investigation right now. And I'll just try to give a simple overview of the four main ones. There's an area called solvolysis. And that's really, as the word implies, it means solvents are being to break down film structures into the main material types. Now, we're not really breaking back down to the polymer itself is not getting broken down, but we're separating out maybe different material groups and being able to then clean those materials, mechanical recycle them, and then get them back into materials. So that's solvolysis. There's another process that's similar called chemolysis. That's really associated with using chemicals to actually break down the polymer chains, to depolymerize the polymer itself. Big focus on that has been over the years on PET. And there's been various success, and there's a number of technologies that are associated with that. There's a third technology area that is called gasification. That's where actually you thermally decompose and you're really breaking down the polymer in the presence maybe of a small amount of moisture or oxygen, and you form a syngas, as it's called, which is really a combination of hydrogen and carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. In a way, it's not entirely recycling, because really the syngas will go off and be used as a fuel, or maybe go in to make fertilizer. And the fourth area is actually pyrolysis, and that's an area where we're seeing a lot of focus in more recent years. And it's where materials, again, are subjected to a thermal decomposition, but it's done in the absence of air or oxygen, and generally an inert atmosphere is done under, and you'll get out three main sort of products in varying degrees. You'll get out like an oil, pyrolysis oil, you might hear it be called, gas, and a char material, solid char. And it's that pyrolysis oil that's really interesting and has been converted today even back through normal refinery processes to make chemical feedstocks that then go back into making polymers. And those polymers, when they're made, because they've come right back from the normal sort of feedstocks that you get from fossil fuel, but in this case, they've come from recycled materials, they're completely food safe. And we're seeing those sorts of materials today emerging, very small volumes, but emerging around the world, back into things like polyethylene and polypropylene. And I was privileged to be part of a a group in Australia just recently that demonstrated that technology, and it was purely a demonstration, but we demonstrated it by collecting materials, flexibles, and putting them back through that sort of advanced pyrolysis technology, and all the way back through the making a resin, a film, all the way back to making a wrapper that went over a Nestle Kit Kat wrapper. And that was really great to be part of that team that really collaborated across the supply chain to do that. So that was a demonstration of pyrolysis. And so they're the main two types of areas in the end of the day, though. You've got mechanical and you've got advanced or chemical.
Thanks very much. I'm glad you mentioned the Kit Kat one, because that is really an interesting one for any of the Australian viewers. They'll be able to, obtain one of those in one of the supermarkets and they can see it for themselves. And hopefully Nestle expands that out to some of the other regions as well. Is that their plan, or you don't know?
Oh, look, I think all organisations that you see, and Nestle, for instance, have been driving significantly across the world support, investigation into how to create the circularity of different materials, including flexibles. But we see that from many different organisations, and certainly there's strong demand for food grade recycled materials to be able to come back into food packaging, Pierre. Yeah.
Graham, we have a lot of viewers, I'm sure, that are, like many of us, learning this whole recycling game. And how does someone out there, how do they know if a product or that packaging of that product is recyclable?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I guess, the glib answer might be everything's recyclable if you're prepared to wait long enough and spend enough money. So I guess the question really is, how do you know if something's economically feasible to recycle, and how do you know if there's an environmental benefit in that recycling process? And I guess, you can see that from two perspectives. I guess from those of us that are in the packaging industry and are designing packaging, and that's brand owners, that's converters like ourselves, it's raw material manufacturers. It's a bit of a call to arms, I think, is to understand what the recycling processes are that this material's likely to be passed through. And so it's really, I guess it's an important thing to engage, as I say, consumers, brand owners, all the way down the supply chain, to engage with the municipal recycling facilities, with the PRFs, to understand whether that product dovetails into those recycling processes. And I guess from a consumer's point of view, they're expected to go into that sort of level of detail. And so increasingly we're seeing brand owners print on the label, communicate to the consumer what the pathway should be, or what the disposition of that packaging should be after its first life. So, for a number of years, many years, in Japan, for instance, people with PETG sleeves on PET bottles. So PET, most insidious, from a label point of view, probably the most insidious contaminant of PET bottles. For many years, decades, there's been communication from the brand owners to the consumer to separate the two, and that's facilitated with zip perfs. So it's quite easy for the consumer to make that separation. And I guess in Australia, as Richard touched on and has been an absolute champion of, is the Australasian recycling label. So very simply, that tells the consumer at the point where he's going to dispose or send that package, spent package on its way, what the direction should be or what the disposition should be, not just of the package as a whole, but of the separable parts. So it's a simple label that directs, potentially directs the primary container into the recycling bin, some of the separable bits that may require a different pathway, you know, through the Red Cycle program, for instance. It directs them to have that component go into recycle, or those bits that aren't, where there isn't currently infrastructure or means of recycling those, to put that third component or that third element, if you like, into, you know, into general waste. So yeah, I guess there's a consumer perspective, you know, how does the consumer know that that's recyclable, and really how do the designers of the packaging themselves know that that's recyclable? And again, you know, I just implore people in the industry to communicate with the recyclers to understand what those processes are.
Thank you.
Pierre, Pierre, can I just make a comment?
For sure.
Yeah, thanks, Pierre. So one of the things I would just to comment on that area is, and as Graham's touched on, we do have the experience in the Australian situation, which is where Graham and I are based, is that the Australian or Australasian recycling label has been utilised to be able to put a very clear label on pack for consumers to know how they can or cannot recycle the product. It's interesting for me, just touching on that program, and it comes under the Australian Packaging Covenant organisation, is I'm now seeing, for instance, that in Singapore, there's an organisation that's forming to again try to utilise the technology and the, let's say, the intellectual property that's embodied within the ARL program into Singapore. And I suppose I would probably encourage other countries, other organisations that work across packaging, maybe to look at that and have and review what's happening with what's been done by APCO. APCO was, and their ARL logo, they were recognised by the United Nations as a leading example of how to incorporate labelling onto packaging. And I'd certainly think that that's a very important step for any country in the step forward of having the circularity of their packaging and making it easy for consumers to understand what can or what can't they do.
Richard, that's a very important aspect you've just covered off there. To my knowledge, and tell me if this is so, that across the world, there's no other country yet that has developed such a program to the extent that this ARL label system is. Is that true? Is that right?
Not 100%, Pierre, but there are definitely other recycling labelling programs in the UK, in the US, and I will find at some point the link and share that that the United Nations put out in their evaluation, and they actually did draw attention to a number of other programs beyond the ARL, but you know, the ARL got very strong recommendation in terms of its thoroughness and the way that it approached the labelling of packaging and its ease of understanding for consumers. So there are some other programs, Pierre, but yeah, no, it's.
Thank you. Which leads me to my next question, Henki, and that is, what are then the advantages of recycling?
The other advantages, I think first is regarding the resources management as well. We are talking a lot regarding the post-consumer waste, which is could be ocean marine debris and so on. But we sometimes forgot the whole climate change is also happening because of the a lot of emissions a lot of usage of energy, which is will harm the whole environment, not only the solid waste. So in fact, what I'm going to say is also regarding the previous question that you said. I believe that the recycling is so important. If you have a kind of a collaborative action plan. I've been living certain years in Germany, and that was during my study in the 70s, 1970s. That in 73, people are talking already over there about the so-called the green dots movement,
Yeah.
dual system Deutschland. Yeah. So this is the real blockchain that they made become legislation in 1990, and that's why the recycling rate in Germany, especially for the packaging, is the highest actually in the world. That's what I read. So the whole collaboration then also make the whole impact into the economy, social, and environment. Yeah, so called the innovation will also encourage to do any of the technology innovation, and then you will accelerate the whole your action plan in that. I believe like that.
Thank you, Henki. Richard, I want to come back to you now, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on this. I'm now referring to bottles, rigids, that have closures on them. And the question is that many folk, I'm sure, have asked you and asked many of the other panel members, and certainly myself, what do we do with the closure or the cap or the top, as some people call it? When we want to recycle the bottle, where does the cap go?
Well, in my experience in the facility that I worked with, Pierre, we could deal with the closures that were coming through. Now that may vary with different facilities around the world, but certainly my experience was that the polypropylene closures, the high density materials, the aluminium closures, even in those days, we had the equipment built into our facility to be able to deal with those materials. So we weren't impacted by the different materials that were utilized by the closures, and we created value streams out of those particular materials. So that was my experience.
So the quick or the easy message to the consumers when they dispose that bottle is to do what with that closure?
I might defer to someone else on that one, Pierre. Might defer to yourself even on that one.
And there's lots of Henki or Graham, jump in if you want to. My understanding is that in this country that they should leave the cap on the bottle.
Yes, look, I'm not well versed there. The only perspective I would have is that there's been some considerable advance in closures, particularly high density polyethylene closures that now have approval for recycling with HDPE containers for food grade applications. And so, hopefully continuing down that line takes away the problem and it just stays with the container. But on the different kinds of closures, yeah, that's a defer from me too.
Henki, you have any comment on that?
Yes, I think you will not eliminate the cap, especially become more important that the packaging today is also one. The other requirement is conveniency. In some country, the older people is getting more and more, so packaging is sometimes not easy to open up. Especially I'm talking about flexible packaging, for example, as well. So even now the packaging in flexible packaging, you're also having the kind of cap and so on. So and that is not the big challenge, I believe, that easily and the rigid packaging as well, especially that the easily then you can separate, you can segregate between the bottle, if that PET bottle, and then the cap is from PE or PP. That is definitely you can separate that easily. From the density is also different. Yeah, PET is a 1.4, and PE and PP is about 0.9. So then easily then in a washing station that you can separate that.
Okay. Graham, a moment ago, I asked Henke what are the advantages of recycling, and he gave a number of them. My question to you is, what are the disadvantages of recycling?
Yes. The disadvantages. Look, potentially, again, you know, it's very much on a kind of case-by-case basis, but, you know, potentially, if we look at, for instance, the greenhouse gas emissions, environmental impact of the process of recycling. So if, you know, if you think about I don't know, HDPE bottle, you know, the collection of that, the hydrocarbons that have to be burnt to collect that material that's kind of spread all over the world, spread all over the country, returning it to a sorting facility that has to separate it from, you know, the disparate materials, moving on to a plastics recycling facility to process that, often with, you know, a degradation of the molecular weight, so a diminution of the properties, and you compare that to the virgin HDPE. You know, in Australia, we open up a valve in the Cooper Basin in the middle of Australia and pipe the gas 2,500 kilometres to the edge of the country, to the processing plant, add some catalyst, heat it to 200 degrees, add a bit of pressure, and you've got virgin PE. So from that, you can see I guess, the economic barrier or challenge in making recycled HDPE cost competitive with virgin material. There's also a question there, I suppose, is, you know, is the net benefit in that circumstance of recycling the material, is the environmental cost greater? So that's one, you know, potential issue. I guess, you know, another potential issue perhaps is degrading of the properties, you know, through I guess polycondensation in the case of PET. There's a lot that has to be done in the mechanical recycling process, a lot of energy, a lot of cost involved to get that product back to, you know, the quality that it originally started at. So, you know, do we then have a situation where, you know, we're having to use more of the recycled product to get the same kind of performance that we would out of virgin? So yeah, it's that equation. And again, you know, such an advocate for quantitative analysis in these situations, doing the sums. Is it a better outcome to an economically sensible and environmentally beneficial to recycle or use virgin?
Yeah, lots of considerations there, you know, and so Henke, listening to Graham's answer, what then, or is there any limit to recycling?
I don't see. I'm always optimistic person, so I believe that the technology will going into more and more advanced, and that is make it possible. Of course, today is we have also thinking about the replacing from one difficult material to recycle to the other easily than the recycled material. For example, like paper. Paper is fortunately is more easy than to recycle, but I don't think that the paper could totally replace the whole plastic today. The whole functionality that we expected from the best material today, I believe, is plastic, of course, and this is very much difficult to replace that. So that's why I believe in the innovation, that the whole technology in the recycling there will help in order to give, as I mentioned that before, economically impact and social and environmental impact in that.
Okay. Richard, again, I'm asking you to address, the folk out there that are not in this recycling game, and they hear all these different terms like biodegradable, compostable. It's all a bit confusing. Can you sort of maybe make it easy for us to understand the differences, and how do we know when one is one and not the other, and so on?
Okay, sure. So if we talk about biodegradable just as a term, it means, in simple terms, something's breaking down, usually by some sort of microbiological activity, and breaking something down into carbon dioxide or maybe methane if there's no oxygen present, water and biomass. And that's really what biodegrading is. And some products will biodegrade really quickly, like paper or cellulose or something like that. Some food, we even a piece of meat, if we leave it out of the fridge, it'll start to biodegrade. Other products take much longer to break down. And then you get into terms, and it does get a little bit confusing to everybody, I suppose, but one of those terms is compostable, and that's just really a very specific form of biodegradation. It's where biodegradation is actually happening in a compost, and that compost, there's probably two areas. There's either an industrial composting facility, or it could be in somebody's own backyard or in their home compost, as it's called. And those, when it's in composting, there are actually some standards that have been written. There's some in different countries around the world that specify out some very clear requirements, which are time bound, that says that the material needs to break down to a certain constituents in a certain amount of time, and the composter has to have that's produced has to have the right quality, make sure it doesn't impact the plants that are going to grow in it, and make sure it doesn't affect the earthworms that are going to live in it, for argument's sake. So composting is really just a one subset of biodegradability, and there's definitively packaging that's out there that has passed through those standards and can be called compostable packaging.
So if they call it compostable packaging, can I put it in my compost at home and will it biodegrade?
Yeah, well, if it's been through the right standards, Pierre, it will, and there's standards written. There is one in Australia. There's others in the Europe. There's others in the US, Japan, and if you pass that particular standard, it'll be considered that yes, that material will break down in the required time, make good compost, and not impact the plants and the earthworms and so forth. Yeah.
So you mentioned there in the right time. What do you mean by time? Is that like 1 week, 1 month, 1 year?
No, it's got a time frame to be able to break down over a period of 6 months from memory, but I don't remember the exact precise time frame off the top of my head right now. And within that, you have to get, it's measured by how the carbon dioxide evolves out of the material that's been, and the package that's been composted. And you have to show that, I think it's something like 85% or so of the carbon dioxide has to get liberated in the first 12 weeks. So, you know, and these have to happen at specific temperatures and specific inoculums of compost and so forth. So it's under very rigorous controlled conditions to try to help replicate, I suppose, how a home compost might operate. Industrial composting operates at higher temperatures. And so that's one of the main differences. The time frames get left the same, but you're able to operate at higher temperatures for the industrial composting testing that goes on.
And I see the other two gentlemen are nodding in agreement with what you were saying, but I'm not going to ask you for their comments simply because can you believe we've run out of time. But I do want to leave you with one last question. Each of you have the same question. You only have 30 seconds to answer it. 30 seconds, because we're on the hour right now. So starting with you, Graham, the same question applies to all three of you. What should the man in the street or the woman in the street do at home in your own backyard? What should we be doing better or differently? What is your message to us? What should we be doing at home to improve the recycling aspect of our environment? Graham.
Listen to the young people that have an appetite for recycling. Look at the packaging. Packaging suppliers communicate what the pathway should be for the recycling of that container. The ARL is the perfect vehicle for doing that.
Thank you. And Henky.
Well, for me, is especially with the Deprimil, because for me, it's the first. What I have to do, you have to close down the open dumping landfill. In Indonesia, there is all still open dumping landfill. Even that we start to segregate our waste at home, but then they collect it in one truck, in one car, and then go into the landfill. So what is a good for in that? So unfortunately, I will not say, as long as the open dumping landfill they not closed down, it will not help.
Thank you. And Richard.
Well, I think as Henky's calling out, it's very different in different parts of the world around Asia. So probably the opportunity is for us as individuals is to get involved in our local community groups and see what can we do to make a difference. And the only other call out I would make if you're into making flexible packaging is please have a look at the Project Barrier guidelines, the CFlex guidelines that are in Europe, and see if you can convert your packaging to those design guidelines. That will help everybody.
Thank you. And really, you know, you guys have ended up on a very good note there as a message to all our listeners and viewers across the world. It's been delightful talking to the three of you. I could go on for another hour, and you know, because the questions just keep on coming. And it's been a wonderful hour spent with you. And thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience and your expertise with all of us. We really appreciate that, both ProPak Asia and the World Packaging Organization. I must remind all our viewers and listeners around the world that we will have another session next week, same time, same place. Next week, we'll be talking about innovations in packaging, and I hope to see you there. So firstly, Richard and Graham in Melbourne in Australia, thank you very much and goodbye. And to Henky in Jakarta and in Indonesia, thank you for joining us and goodbye, and over to you to Rose.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Pierre and all the experts appreciate for the session sharing today. So we will definitely share the rerun session to more audience that could not catch up today. And we hope to welcome you all again next week, and definitely looking forward to see you guys in person at ProPak Asia event in the near future. Thank you. สวัสดีค่ะ
Thank you. Thank you. And goodbye.